today we'll start with some prayers. That is, we do the meditation first, generating the motivation as you know it, except I'll go through it a little faster. And we do refuge. I spoke about refuge a little bit before, so you remember what I said yesterday. We do the prayer of refuge and bodhicitta, taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. We do that 3 times. Then we've got the 4 measurables. We do it once, again just to enhance our compassion, the motivation for why we're doing what we're doing right now. And we'll recite the Heart Sutra. Okay, for the first time, we'll do it together. And of course, you'll at least understand the first paragraph. I mean, you understand the rest as well, but you understand it better, hopefully. Okay, great. So let's start with some breathing, just to calm down, let go of any disruptive thoughts. And then think that you're in the place where the Heart Sutra was spoken. On Vulture's Mass Mountain. In the presence of the fully enlightened Buddha. Whose mere presence puts your mind at rest. And inspires you to become just like him. And the Buddha is surrounded by pure practitioners who implement the Buddha's teachings as arhats, bodhisattvas, and beginners on the path. Think that you're surrounded by all sentient beings. Quietly seated together with you in the presence of the Buddha. And based on the understanding that they're just like us, not wanting to suffer and wanting to be happy and satisfied. generate affectionate love, a sense of closeness, care and affection for all sentient beings. Which then gives way to great compassion. An affectionate mind that sincerely wishes for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and its causes. And that wishes, may I be able to protect them from all their sufferings and its causes. Try to really feel that from the depth of your heart. And then allow for your compassion to grow even stronger. Giving rise to the altruistic attitude, which is not just the mere wish, but the determination to do whatever we can, no matter how long it may take, to help sentient beings to overcome suffering and its causes. But since realistically we can only help sentient beings in the most effective way once we've become enlightened, let's then generate this sincere aspiration to attain the enlightened state of a Buddha. For exactly that purpose, to be of greatest benefit to sentient beings and to help them overcome all their obstructions. For them to be able to reach the state of liberation and even Buddhahood. So this is also the motivation we carry throughout the day. To listen to, reflect on, and meditate on the Heart Sutra. And so while holding that mind of enlightenment, let's recite the prayers together. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of attachment and hatred for those held close and distant. All right. So please keep your focus on the words of the sutra. Okay? Try to reflect on it as much as you can. We start with, thus did I hear at one time. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Master Vulture's mountain in Rajgriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also, at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya-Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent existence. Then, through the nature of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya-Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya-Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharatvati-putra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is no other than form, form is also no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared Tayata Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisoha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Aryavalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharatwatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Aryavalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Okay, great. It's a slightly unfamiliar version. The sutra, I noticed. But like as I said, there's just many different ways to translate it. And anyway, we'll go through it to explain every word. One thing I wanted to talk about, well, never mind, I don't remember it now. But going back to this, returning to this sutra, as you've heard, the Buddha gave this particular teaching in the context of giving what are called the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And actually, there are said to be three that are most important. A great Nalanda master of the 8th century called Haribhadra, he basically classified, or he mentioned those three, those most important ones that are the extensive, middling, and the condensed sutra, as they usually described, which kind of emphasizes three of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras as particularly important. So it's the extensive, which comprises 100,000 verses, and then you have the middling, which comprises 25,000 verses. And the Tibetans keep saying 20,000 verses, but according to my understanding, it's actually 25,000. And then there's the condensed version, which is 8,000 verses. And sometimes they also include in the extensive one another extensive middling, shorter, that it can be, there are more extensive ones, three actually, of which one is more extensive than the other, one is middling, but forget about that part, that gets too confusing. So just to remember those three, the extensive, middling, and condensed or brief Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, so 800,000, 25,000, 8,000 verses. Okay. So these sutras were all translated into Tibetan, plus another 14. So there are 17 of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras that were translated into Tibetan, considered to be the most important ones, I guess the clearest, most important, I think, suffices to say. So those ones were translated into Tibetan, including the Heart Sutra. And there were also great commentaries by the Nalanda masters, Indian Nalanda masters. There were 21 of those important commentaries. For instance, Haribhadra's commentary, I just mentioned him. And those commentaries were also, 21 of them were translated into Tibetan. I'm sure there were more Indian commentaries, but those were probably considered the most important ones and translated into Tibetan. And of course then you had many other commentaries by the Tibetans explaining these texts. So, actually what you may notice in the Tibetan tradition is that they follow a lot of commentaries. And that is sometimes criticized. People say, well, why don't you read the original sutras? But what is important to know is that, of course, they're right, those criticizing the tradition. And of course, the goal is that once you've gone through the commentaries, that you go to the original sutras, you read the original sutras, now hopefully having a sufficient understanding to not misunderstand their meaning. Because what is important to understand, that of course the style of teaching has changed over the years. The style of presenting a text. I mean, the Heart Sutra is pretty unusual. Starts off like a fairy tale, thus have I once heard, once upon a time, kind of, right? It reminds us of the start of a fairy tale. And then, okay, the situation is described, and then it goes into the sutra. The Buddha says, well, he says a little bit more than well said, but he doesn't say really a lot, basically. And still it's attributed to the Buddha. And moreover, it tells us no eye, no ear, no nose, no enlightened being, no giver, no receiver. What's going on? Nothing there. There's a joke His Holiness likes to tell. He says, in Tibet, there was someone who listened to someone else recite the Heart Sutra. No eyes, no ear, no nose, and so forth. And this person was like, oh, what a hassle. Why just not say no face? Why do you have to go through all? Just say no face. So anyway, it's an unusual style of teaching, right? Okay. So following the Heart Sutra then were the commentaries. And again, following after maybe a few centuries after the teaching of the Heart Sutra. And again, the style of teaching had changed. And it kept changing and it kept changing. So to someone later on, it was not immediately obvious what were the intentions of the author. So they had to be explained again, had to be explained again. And if you read now texts from the 14th, 13th, 14th century, like the great master Lama Tsongkhapa, Tibetan master's writing, again, it's really difficult. I mean, even in English translation, sometimes I find the Tibetan easier than the English translation, because grammatically and, just because of the nature of the English language, you need to make it really complicated. And in Tibetan, you have these long sentences that can cover a whole page. And kind of to reflect the kind of flow of the sentence, you may end up with long, winded, kind of complicated sentences. Anyway, therefore we have commentaries which again and again explain Lama Tsongkhapa, explain the masters of India after the Buddha, and of course the Buddha's teachings. So it's really helpful. But the goal is, of course, not to stop there. All right, read all the commentaries, done. And so, as His Holiness would sometimes say, well, we don't have the Kangyo and Tengyur here. Kangyo and Tengyur is the Tibetan word for saying the translation of the words of the Buddha, the translation of usually it's on that side, so the translation of the words of the Buddha, the translation of the words of the treatises. Yeah. So what the Tibetan did, they did an incredible job. Not only did they translate 17 of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, but they translated 100, more than 100, around 108 volumes of the words of the Buddha themselves, translated them into Tibetan, and more than 200 volumes of the commentaries that were then later given by Nalanda masters such as Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Buddhapalita, Baba Viveka. So you may have heard these names. Never mind now. If you have later on interest to study more about the Dharma, you'll study probably their texts. So they're then put on the other side of an altar. They're in folios, in loose leaves, the way traditional Tibetan texts were printed in these loose leaves. They were first printed, of course, and then arranged in those leaves and wrapped in cloth. And there's a little piece of colorful paper. You can open it and then you have the name of the text. There's also a way of categorizing or cataloging these texts so you can easily find it. And they're usually on the altars. and or near the altar, like to the right, to the left. If you go to the main temple, you can see all these in kind of orangey, saffron-colored wrappings, book wrappings. You can see all these texts, and so His Holiness says we should take them down from the altar. They should not just be on the shelves, and we should take them down and read them. So a lot of people now do this. They're printed, many of these texts, or they're online available, either available online or in book form, which is so much easier than having loose leaves and having to deal with them. Actually, when I studied, we still had loose leaves. So we carried all these long, and you're supposed to, it's not so nice to put them in your bag, right? A book is kind of all right. So we're supposed to carry them like this. So we carry them on our shoulders, to class. We had like quite a few of them. So the main text, and then the commentary, and the second commentary. So anyway, in that way, therefore, as I'm saying, the Tibetans did an amazing job translating these texts, and the goal is, of course, on the basis of understanding their meaning now, go back to the sutras. All right. Okay, but we got to a point of this Heart Sutra when emptiness is now mentioned for the first time. So we'll have to spend some time on emptiness. I want to read a little bit more and go back to emptiness again and again. It is such a difficult topic, and I don't think we should expect of ourselves to fully grasp it right away. That's why we study for so long. Most of the studies are directly or indirectly meant to or are directed towards understanding emptiness, or gain a better understanding, a deeper understanding, to train our intelligence, to make our mind more flexible. Going through all these different ideas that sometimes in total opposition to our usual view of reality. And you learn about it one day, and it's really interesting how the mind works. You hear it one day and you go, what? Right? Okay, and then you have a cup of tea. Take it, take it easy, be relaxed about it. And the next day, suddenly that confusion that you experienced yesterday has lifted slightly. And there's a kind of better sense of, okay, maybe that's what it means. At least some questions arise, at least what you could ask. Whereas previously it was like total confusion. I don't even have a question. Okay. And so what I just said is a very important principle as part of Buddhist study and practice. To be really relaxed and laid back. Right? The Australians are doing quite well. Australians are known for being really laid back. No wonder there are a lot of Buddhist centers in Australia. So, no, it's really the Tibet. That's why also Buddhism works so well for the Tibetans, because they're definitely very laid back. Indians, of course, as well. Laid back, right? This kind of, okay, if it doesn't happen today, it happens tomorrow. And that is a very healthy attitude. We're too stressed in many of the Western countries. Not all Western countries. I mean, Germans are not known for being relaxed. But the thing is, so there is this attitude we really need to learn to adopt, because this takes a lot of time. This just takes a lot of time. And we need to give our mind time to become more familiar with these ideas. And sometimes just having a good night's sleep makes all the difference. And to be patient with ourselves, right? We're not going to change our mind from today to the next day. No way. It takes so much time. Of course, it's difficult because we live at the age of fast food. Fast cars are getting faster. The internet is getting faster. Everything is getting faster. But Dharma practice is just as slow as it was before. So it's slightly, it's difficult. It takes the time to get used to it and find the right pace. And yesterday I talked about the challenges of some of the Dharma centers. And especially in Dharma centers where more Western people live, where more Western, because we have this tendency of wanting it quick, quick, quick. And what happens is, I call it the rubber band effect. The rubber band effect. When you stretch a rubber really strongly in one direction, what happens? At some point you have to let it go, and it goes exactly the other direction, right? So you're like, bodhicitta, I'm going to have bodhicitta today. I'm going to be so compassionate. Come on, be compassionate. And then you lose it. I mean, it's like, I'm exaggerating. Of course I'm exaggerating, but people wanting it so badly and the motivation is not necessarily for all sentient beings, but the self-cherishing just creeps in. We can't help it. We're so used to that mind. It creeps in all the time. It seems to suggest that all our practice is Dharma practice. I'm so generous. Can you please put my name on the side of the building? Right? Or I'm so compassionate. I'm so patient. Okay. So it's like, it's just a natural human response, but it gets even worse when we're uptight. And the funny thing is, people sometimes say, Buddhist practitioners are even more selfish because we think more about the self than we ever did before. And maybe we just give it a little bit of more fodder, a little bit more fuel to I don't know. Or it's, sometimes I feel like my self-cherishing mind is kicking and screaming. No, I'm not going to get less. You can't get rid of me. It feels that way, right? Because we also, when we're stressed, when we're in a hurry, instead of dealing with self-cherishing, we have a tendency to suppress it. Pressure cooker effect, right? You can suppress something for that long and then it comes up stronger. So we need to learn to relax, to be okay that the progress is slow. And not to check, how have I changed since yesterday? Give it some more time. 6 months ago, a year ago. And you'll see there is actually a lot of change. In the time span of a year, a lot happens. There are problems a year ago in terms of afflictions that you had a hard time dealing with that now you've even forgotten that you had that problem. So progress, of course, happens, but it's slow. In the beginning. Because one of my teachers talked about the beginning of Dharma practice is like, you're in the jungle, you've got an old bicycle, and you got a road full of potholes. This is Dharma practice. You fall off the bike, you get up again. Maybe you need to walk back and then try a different path, and there are all these potholes, and you hurt yourself, and you're exhausted and everything, until you get to the highway. Leave the bicycle at the side of the road and get into a Porsche or something, right? Get into a fast car. And then things are much smoother. It's in the beginning. In the beginning, we'll face a lot of obstacles, a lot of difficulties, but it gets easier as you continue. And if you've reached, or when you reach a certain level, then the ride is much smoother and you progress much faster. But we need to get there first. So let's be realistic about where we are right now. Let's start where we are, but still not lose sight of our goal. So there's no contradiction that even though we don't have bodhicitta, we have self-cherishing, to kind of fake it, right? To pretend we do, to go through the motion. I think it was Geshe Kelsang who once used this analogy. It's like we're wearing a spacesuit and trying to dance a ballet. How graceful does it really look wearing a spacesuit and dancing some kind of, I don't know, nutcracker or whatever these ballets are called, I don't even know. Anyway, so therefore, let's be realistic, it takes time. I think it's really good to know, and to know about the rubber band effect, and not to suppress. Okay, but going back to emptiness, talking about emptiness, a very interesting idea when it comes to emptiness is also the concept of zero. What is that in Sanskrit? Shunya. What is the word for emptiness in Sanskrit? Shunyata. Shunya. Shunyata, shunya. Zero. Okay. So actually, zero has been around for a long time, but it was really established by two great Indian mathematicians and astronomers. The first one, I have to still look, Aryabhata. Aryabhata was the first one of the 5th century. Of course, I feel ridiculous telling this to those from India. You know so much better. I don't know anything really about him. I know you had a spacecraft that was called Aryabhata, right? That's when the mathematician became really famous. But because he was not that much was known about him until pretty recently. But he was known, but not as known as he is now, of course, after the spacecraft was called after him. So anyway, so he, in the 5th century, basically took up that principle and developed it further, I guess, kind of integrated it more into astronomy and so forth. And then there was Brahmagupta in the 7th century who really integrated it into mathematics and established rules about it. So there was this idea, of course, you know, 1 versus nothing, so 0. But the mathematical kind of principle, or as part of the, like one of the digits in mathematics, introducing it as 0, that was basically, I think it was Brahmagupta of the 7th century. And so initially it was just a dot. It was represented by a dot. But later on, when it went to Arab, it was this oval shape. I don't know whether that's exactly the way it was, whether it was always a dot. But what is really important is that it doesn't mean nothingness. It doesn't mean nothingness. I mean, just the shape of it, it's whole, it's complete, right? This oval. The Tibetans actually draw a circle to represent 0. So the numbers are quite similar to the Arabic numbers, but not exactly. They're just similar. And their 0 is not oval, it's round. So it's quite interesting that it is round, because it means kind of completeness, fullness, wholeness, and possibilities, right? And apparently shunya has the meaning of, it has this root of growth. Growth, like something, it also can mean hollow, but also growth. And if something is hollow, there are possibilities to put something in there, right? You've got a hollow box, you can fill it. Growth, of course, the possibility for growth. And what's very significant is that zeros follow other numbers to get larger quantities. So you have 1 and you add 1 0, 2 zeros, and more possibilities. So 0 really implies possibilities, quantity. So it's quite interesting. So that idea is very similar to the Buddhist concept of emptiness. Possibilities. If things didn't lack inherent existence, they couldn't exist. It'd be impossible. They can only exist because they lack inherent existence, and we just don't recognize that, right? So, therefore, in the same way as 0, the digit 0 implies possibilities, growth, and so forth. Likewise, with naming, with labeling, and the fact that phenomena lack inherent existence, anything becomes possible. Reality is possible. Okay? So I think that's a nice kind of concept. And there's some theory, and it's probably coming from the Buddhists, that shunya, this 0 was really discovered based on shunyata, because of that. But I don't know if that's true. Whether it was definitely not the other way around, because the word shunyata existed before. But anyway, who knows what the connection was between the introduction of the digit 0, as we know it nowadays, and Buddhism. We don't know. But I still think, I like the parallel. I like to introduce it just to get rid of the sense of nothingness. But there's a simple reason, or maybe not that simple, but there is a reason why to us emptiness automatically means nothingness. What is the reason? Well, take a table, for instance. For us, for our mind, an inherently existent table and a table are exactly the same. Please don't forget. There's no difference to our mind between an inherently existent table and a table. No difference. Like if you think, you're not aware of it really. That's why it's so difficult, that first step of recognizing what we're trying to negate. We're not negating the table. But for us, since the table and the inherently existent table are exactly the same, we have no other concept of the table other than of an inherently existent table. Refuting an inherent existent table is for us the same as refuting a table. We're not left with the table, because otherwise, how could the table exist otherwise? How could myself? Remember, I talked about this a few days ago. I said, from morning to evening, there's this voice in our head, I need, I don't need, I want, I don't want, right? I need to get some coffee. I don't want to meet this person. I don't want to get up now. I want to get up now, and so forth. But that I that appears is the inherently existent I. And when I ask you, sweep through your body, remember, first I said, think of the I the way it appears to you. That is not the conventional, that's not the existent I, it's the inherently existent I. And now search for it. And lo and behold, you don't find it. In the end, you go through your body, go through your mind, and you don't find it, right? And our conclusion is often, therefore, I don't exist. But we didn't look for the conventional I, we didn't look for the existent I, we looked for the I the way it appears to our mind. Right now, we're not aware of the conventional I. Why? Because they appear mixed to our mind. They appear mixed. That conventional I appears to be inherently existent. So we end up with an inherently existent conventional I, which is really another way of saying an inherently existent I. Okay? That's why we fall into the extreme of nihilism. Okay? But that's part of this process. So we're negating too much. Initially, our whole life we spent not negating anything, totally believing in that exaggerated appearance. And then when we're asked to negate, we negate too much. It's a typical, I wouldn't just say human reaction, a reaction of any living being. I mean, when you walk a balance beam, right? And you go too much to one side, you go to the other side right away, right? To find that balance, it takes a while. Likewise here. You go to one extreme, if you are in one extreme, the way to undo that is to go to the other extreme. It's just a natural reaction until you find the middle way. And those extremes, they're sometimes even wanted. There are extremes in your practice that are fostered intentionally. To give you another example, who's more important, you or others? Actually, they're equally important. It wouldn't make sense that I'm less important than everyone else, because from your perspective, you should therefore be less important, and everyone else, including myself, should be more important. And if that's true for everyone, we're equally important. Just logically, it makes sense, doesn't it? However, in our practice, we are encouraged to meditate on others as more important. Why is that? That's not realistic. Well, to kind of get out of that other extreme. I'm more important. I'm the center of the universe. I've followed that view for so many lifetimes. And now, to kind of undo that habit, that habitual tendency that left strong imprints in my mind, strong tendencies in my mind, I go the other way, right? And so I can undo those tendencies a little bit. So you'll find, especially this practice has to do with the practices that are categorized as the method path of Buddhism, the method side of Buddhism, not the wisdom side. Of course, wisdom should not be totally separate from it, but what we're saying is that it's okay. We don't need to be strictly in accordance with reality on that one, since we know that's not realistic, but we still practice it because it helps the mind, right? And there are other examples, the practice of Donglen, giving and taking. I visualize I take on all the suffering of sentient beings. Well, you don't. If you were able to do that, you wouldn't have suffering in the first place, because the Buddha would have taken care of it long ago. just breathing in and out, he would have taken all our sufferings. We wouldn't have to do these practices. So of course it's not realistic. But it's really helpful to our mind. That determination, that inner strength. I'll take on everyone's suffering. I don't care. I need to carry my own and I carry everyone else's. I'm ready to be there for others, right? Okay. Anyway, just this much on some of the topics that are important. But now let's return to the text. What have we found out? What have we heard about this text? The title was given at the very beginning. First the Sanskrit title, followed by the Tibetan title, put there by the Tibetan translators. So we know its source is Indian, it's Sanskrit, its source is, originating from the Buddha. Then we have this line that gives the length of the text, one segment, one section as it's sometimes called, and then the homage by the translators, and thereafter the text starts. First with a prologue, a common prologue, which describes at least 4 aspects: the time, the teacher, the place, and the audience. Okay, giving us a bit of a sense of the background. Sometimes described as the excellent time, the excellent teacher, and so forth. But of course, what it refers to is, of course, those 4 points. And that is followed by the uncommon context, or the uncommon prologue, giving us the uncommon or less obvious kind of background of this particular teaching, which is the Buddha being in a special meditative absorption on the profound, which is emptiness, and the appearance of the different categories of phenomena, the diversity of phenomena, implying that the Buddha is able to perceive both the varieties of phenomena, all the different phenomena that appear to us, plus their ultimate nature at the same time, which is something we cannot do. For us, it's impossible to perceive, for instance, the self, and at the same time be aware of the lack of inherent existence of the self. We can switch back and forth, but we can't do it simultaneously. It's only a Buddha's mind that is free from the obstructions that prevent a being from seeing both truths simultaneously. All right. So, therefore, this first passage is saying the Buddha directly experienced emptiness, but at the same time also experienced the variety, the diversity of different phenomena. And actually, sometimes it seems to suggest that the Buddha just entered that meditative equipoise, but he's always in that meditative equipoise. A Buddha is always perceives the ultimate nature of all phenomena, while at the same time also perceives all other phenomena. A Buddha could actually communicate with others at the same time. But here, it's just in terms of common appearance, what appeared to sentient beings who could not fully fathom the abilities of the Buddha, it appeared like the Buddha was just silently sitting there not doing anything, right? So, but what happens is actually what the Buddha did while he was sitting there, and this is a little difficult. He blessed the mind of Avalokiteshvara to engage in this reflection on emptiness, as we read here. Then, Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld the 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. First of all, it's grammatically a little weird. Those aggregates, they weren't really mentioned before, and also, where's that also come from? So it's significant in terms of the meaning, although it sounds a little awkward in English. But the point is here that, first of all, what Avalokiteshvara did was through the blessing of the Buddha. Now, blessing. What does that mean? What is a blessing? We hear all the time. Well, we know it from other religions, right? From Hinduism. In Judaism, the concept of blessing exists, right? Yes. In Christianity as well. In Islam as well. What is a blessing? What is that? I mean, in English, we borrow a term in Tibetan, which means, the Tibetan term means to transform into something greater. Great, that really helps me, right? I mean, if I go to a gym, I transform into something, or if I meditate, I transform into something greater. So I'm blessed, or what? The explanation of that word doesn't help, I think. Doesn't really give us the full definition. Some people like to use the word inspire. It's great. In this context, you could say, by the Buddha entering or being kind of displaying this aspect of being in this meditative equipoise, it inspired Avalokiteshvara to also reflect on emptiness. That makes sense here. But the way the word blessing is meant is not always inspire. Because inspire, the agency of that word is more on the side of the person who's inspired. It's kind of like you can look at an inanimate object and be inspired. But here, there's the agency comes from the person giving the blessing, right? So there's more of an agency in Tibetan, actually. It has much more of a sense that there's more coming from the Buddha. Now, when you hear this, the Buddha blesses me, we go, well, but the Buddha can't remove my suffering, and the Buddha can't do this. Okay, so right away that kind of thought may arise. He blesses me, he changes me into something greater. Okay, but this is an important point. Because although the Buddha cannot totally remove our suffering, cannot transfer his, cannot remove our cannot wash away our non-virtues, cannot remove with his hands our suffering, and cannot implant his understanding of the ultimate nature of all phenomena, but he's not totally unable to help us in certain ways in which an ordinary person cannot. Just take the simple example of going to a doctor, right? A doctor cannot magically remove all our sickness. Can maybe remove a thorn that gives us a hard time. Okay, but your mom could do that. So the point being that the doctor is also limited, cannot remove all sicknesses, but can do more than your mother can. In terms of certain diseases, can actually operate, for instance, through surgery or through whatever kind of treatments, a doctor like acupuncture and so forth. So there's certain things a doctor can do. So a Buddha likewise can do certain things. So can actually, and so that's what blessing has so many different meanings, can actually make your mind think of emptiness for at least a while. You have to then continue from there. But I'll give you a beautiful example that a lot of people have experiences of. When they're in the presence of someone special as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for instance, right? Who has that ability. If he's a Buddha, he has the same ability. If he's a Bodhisattva, he has a similar ability to open our minds. People have these experiences when they go to a teaching. The words may be exactly the same words that someone else spoke just an hour ago, or that you find in a text written by another person. But through the blessing, and here it's like, for a lack of a better word, through the power of this person, suddenly you have this insight, right? You can call it a eureka moment, actually. You have that insight, that kind of like, whoa, right? He opens your mind to some ideas. The problem is, it's not going to remain with you at all times. It's going to die down again. You have to do all the work. It's almost like Buddhist advertising. This is what's possible. Now make an effort or not, right? Right? It's almost like to give you a taste of it, right? Give you a taste of it. This is what's possible. So you've got this experience and you go, wow, right? People have this experience in the presence of His Holiness. Suddenly they're like, people start crying usually. Because when we have an incredibly strong emotional response, we don't know how to respond other than by crying. It doesn't mean we're sad, right? But that is considered to be a blessing of a being. Touches something in you that you didn't even know was there. Shows you the possibilities, right? This is why we need living masters, right? We need living masters. So those are teachers. Those are real teachers. Those are masters who have realizations and they do something to you. And I've definitely had that experience, like many other people, with Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, what he did to my mind, it was unbelievable. This whole place turned into something different. The leaves on the trees, they look golden. It was crazy. I didn't talk about it. I was like, oh God, they're just going to think I'm crazy. But everything was different when he was around. I don't know how to, and it was him. Because when he was gone, it was gone. Right? It all turned into dusty leaves once again, right? It's really bizarre. So that's why in the Tibetan tradition, sometimes they give the tradition, in the old days, they called the Tibetan Buddhist tradition Lamaism, because there was so much emphasis on the Lama, but that was totally misunderstood. Then the Indian tradition was Lamaism to the same degree. The ancient, of course, Buddhist tradition where Buddhism originated, right? Especially the Nalanda tradition. It was saying you receive the qualities of the Buddha through the Lama. That's a living Buddha, if you like. Although, even if they're not a Buddha, but if they have certain qualities, if they've reached a certain level, such as being a bodhisattva, if you then see them as a Buddha, you receive the full benefit. It's dangerous to receive someone who's not a bodhisattva or who's not got special qualities as a Buddha, because that could lead to, abuse and so forth. That could be a problem. Okay, I mean, I'm not talking about sexual abuse necessarily. I'm talking about the ego of this person hitting the roof and so forth, and you being possibly misguided. Therefore, it's important to find a qualified person, and there are quite a few around. And as I said, you don't have to hang around them and rub shoulders with them all the time. Become some kind of Dharma groupie. They exist. There are real Dharma groupies. Don't want to be separate from... No. Like I said, it's a physical connection. Honestly, I met Lama Zopa Rinpoche not more than 5 times maybe. Maybe it was a few times more. But he was always present. Somehow he was always present. As long as I thought of him, I didn't forget. Right? So the Lamas are like the sun. The sun shines everywhere. But as long as we remain in the shadow, we don't benefit from them. So we need to walk out and receive it. And then it's indiscriminate. It's impartial. Right? It's so beautiful. We're so lucky we have these Lamas. That's why we add this prayer at the very end. Please don't go. And if you do go, come back. Right? Okay. Anyway, so this much. Therefore, on blessings. So the Buddha did something to Avalokiteshvara, whether it was inspiration or whatever else he did, and even more so, to add something to it, which I haven't mentioned. Ananda or Manjushri, whoever was the person giving this prologue, he was likewise inspired to give that prologue. And that is considered to be the words of the Buddha. Well, they're not called blessed words. They're not words really that took place because of the blessing so much. They're called usually permitted words. Words that the Buddha gave the permission to speak. And in that way, we distinguish between 3 types of teaching of a Buddha. Words the Buddha spoke himself. Words the Buddha spoke himself. That's obviously a teaching of the Buddha, no doubt. But that's what we usually think a teaching of a Buddha must be. But no, there are 2 more. There are those when the speaker is blessed to ask a question. When something is inspired, or even more so through the power of the Buddha, suddenly this person has that urge to say something and to ask a question or maybe answer. Right? Answer, as in the case of this dialogue between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. And in that case, it's being through the blessing of the Buddha. Or in the case of the person actually telling the whole sutra, being permitted, having received permission by the Buddha to speak those words. And also, I mean, it's sometimes also mentioned that they were blessed, but it's actually not called a blessed kind of speech, but it's rather a speech that takes place through a blessing, but it's rather called a speech that took place because of being permitted to speak these words. Okay, so this is an important aspect of every sutra. So we say it's a teaching of the Buddha, but it teaches us also something else. Because the fact that the Buddha first entered this meditative backward pose and thereafter Avalokiteshvara, it shows us we should learn from the Buddha. When the Buddha meditates on emptiness, well, we should also do the same. We should put into practice, right? And it goes from teacher to disciple. It goes from teacher to disciple. So the Buddha entered into this meditative backward pose. Of course, he always is in that meditative backward pose, but he practiced at some point when he was not a Buddha, as a bodhisattva, reached the completion of his practice, reached that enlightened state, and now his disciples should do the same thing. And they should help each other. What they study, they give on to others. And this question and answer, it also reminds me of discussions. We have discussions with each other. We have debates with each other, asking a question. So this is a way to learn from each other. Many of the sutras have these dialogues, which is really like a question and answer in the form of a, I don't know, maybe not really a debate so much, but a discussion. So it shows us, this in itself teaches us, this is how we should learn, right? Don't become a solitary learner, but become a learner who doesn't just learn from the teacher, but you can learn just as much, sometimes even more. Yeah, I mean, I would exclude the lamas, but, you know, from your classmates. Like I said, we all have this innate wisdom that is active at times, that sometimes we're not aware of, but that comes through in particular in situations such as discussions and so forth. So don't underestimate your own wisdom. Yeah? Okay. And if we have like a group of people and a discussion, it's always good to have more. The more the better. The more, I mean, doesn't mean you have to exchange in every situation, but in your life, the more conversation you have with people, the more you learn, because everyone has something to contribute. That's very important. Anyway, but this is also shown by this event here in the sutra. Anyway, but we didn't get to the dialogue yet. But I want to say a little bit more about all these titles. Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara. I mean, that's a mouthful, right? Okay, Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara. Okay, so first of all, Avalokiteshvara. This is not the Buddha of compassion here. Confusing. It's so confusing in Buddhism that they oftentimes use the same term for different things, right? Self and self. Existent self, non-existent self. It's a good example, right? Similarly, for instance, the Buddha of compassion, the summary of all the compassion of the Buddhas being depicted in the form of Avalokiteshvara, or the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Here's the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, not a Buddha. It's the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, who was a close disciple of the Buddha, but who was known for his great love and compassion. Right? No surprise. Must be some connection. It was not like the selfish Avalokiteshvara. I mean, of course, there are also nowadays people who called Sangye. Sangye is the Tibetan word for Buddha, right? So the cook, Sangye, doesn't necessarily mean, you know, it can be a selfish cook. But anyway, the point being that Avalokiteshvara was this really compassionate disciple, and his word, the word Avalokiteshvara. So if we look at the word itself, let me just a sec. Need to find it. I don't want to leave anything out. So the connotation is of Avalokita. Actually, Lokeshvara means Lord of the world. Lokeshvara. Oh, do we need to take a break? Is it time for a break? Yeah, I don't want to stress it too long, but okay. Anyway, let's go a little bit longer. What time is a good time to have a break? It's now 10:15, 11:45, an hour and a half more. Let's go a little bit longer. Can you still do it? Your knees are, okay. Lokeshwara means Lord of the world, right? Avalokita means the one who looks down, with full of compassion. So the one who looks upon us with compassion. So Lokeshwara in itself has one meaning. Avalokite means the one who looks down, Avalokita. And Shvara is Ishvara, the powerful one. Ishvara, the powerful one. Okay? So powerful in a sense because he has the power to dispel the sufferings of sentient beings. Because through his example and through his words, someone who really practices compassion, they're an incredible example to others by their own existence, but also through their teachings. And therefore, that's the solution to our trouble. If we really have compassion for ourselves and others, we have a lot less problems, a lot less suffering. It's the best technique. And you may have noticed, as long as the Dalai Lama, for the last few years, has very much stressed the importance of love and compassion, In every teaching, he stresses it. To understand this is really the essence of all teachings, right? Of course, it takes some time. We need to first generate, of course, compassion for ourselves. We brought it up yesterday. We had that discussion. You mentioned it. One of you mentioned it. Very important. Compassion for ourselves, or you do it, yes. Compassion for ourselves first, love for ourselves first, and then for others. It's impossible to worry. We worry about ourselves when there's attachment. We worry about others when there's attachment. But when there's deep love and care, we don't worry. There's not this worry that comes with suffering. If there's worry at all, it's a healthy type of worry that induces activity, compassionate action. I need to do something. But it's not that worry that is fearful. No, it's not fear. Compassion is not fear. It does not, if it's real compassion. Our problem is that our compassion and our attachment gets mixed. Sound familiar? I love you. What does that mean? I can't be without you. Don't leave me. Or, I want you to be sincerely happy. You be with this other woman, it's fine, as long as you're happy. Right? We all know, right? When we say, I love you, that's not necessarily a lie. In the sense of love, well, the way it's defined in Buddhism, wanting another person to be happy. You've got your moments with that person, definitely. When they want something and you help them in whichever way you can to reach that goal. Because you want them to be happy. You'll be so happy when they reach that goal. That is love. When you rejoice in their success and you support them to have whatever they want, as an example, right? That is love. But the problem is, in our case, we have the ability to love. Biologically, we have the ability. I mean, mothers, right? They have it. It's a part of. It's a chemical process that supports that. We all have that ability, but it gets mixed with attachment. Therefore, our love for another person, when we say "I love you," at times it's yes, right? I love you as in like I want you to be happy. At other times it's I want you to make me happy. Don't leave me. Right? But I love you. How can you do this? Right? Okay? So it has these two connotations. And no one judges you for it. No one. You're free to do whatever you want. Be as attached as you get. But if you don't want to suffer, then work on the one and try to reduce the other. Because attachment is what the word implies. It chains you. When you're attached, you can't let go. You lose your freedom. And we all know freedom is so important. But the more attached we are, the less free we are. We are always worried this other person does this, that, and the other. Right? We're all familiar with that. So the stronger our attachment, the stronger our suffering. So from a Buddhist point of view, we say attachment is bad, not because there is some entity that decides what's good and bad, and then you just have to follow it. No. We label it bad because it gives us that which we don't want, suffering. Right? It gives us that which we don't want. Therefore, we call it bad, harmful. It gives us suffering. Therefore, let's try and reduce it. Let's try. Don't stop it. You can't stop it the next day. Impossible. But let's become aware of it. That's the culprit. And learn to distinguish between love and compassion. So, therefore, compassion for all sentient beings, here the goal is that it's not mixed with attachment. Anyway, you'll never be attached to all sentient beings. No way. Right? You'll never be attached to all sentient beings. You will never be angry with all sentient beings. So, right? I mean, I'm angry with the world, but really you're just angry with this idea of everything, but you're not really angry with everyone. Okay, great. So, going back to Avalokiteshvara, so has the power to remove the suffering of sentient beings. That's why he's called Avalokita, the one who looks at us, gazes at us with compassion, Ishvara, powerful one. All right. And it's actually explained, this name is explained in the White Lotus Sutra, also taught at Rajgriha, at the same place, the White Lotus Sutra. It's been translated into English, actually, by the way. You can read the whole sutra. It's quite long. But in the 24th chapter, it's actually this dialogue. I think it's Subhuti and the Buddha. I think it was Subhuti and the Buddha, who are having this dialogue about why Avalokiteshvara was called Avalokiteshvara. And so that's the explanation that's given. But he's also called a Mahasattva, a great being. Maha, great. Sattva, being or even hero, right? A hero, Mahasattva, like a hero. Arya in Tibetan, in Sanskrit, in the Buddhist context, the word Arya means a being who's realized the truth directly, who's directly realized ultimate nature. And then you have Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva. Bodhi, enlightenment. Sattva, the hero with the mind of enlightenment. So a hero, someone who heroically works on the basis of the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. Okay? That doesn't really come across in the Sanskrit as much as in the Tibetan. The Tibetans, they added some more syllables that are all implied in the Sanskrit. So, but in the Sanskrit, you would probably just say body. Body means enlightenment, and sattva means like hero or person, right? Whereas in Tibetan, you have chang, chup, sempa. Chang, chup, sempa. Chang means either to have purified, have overcome. Chup means to have realized, to understood. So to overcome what's in the way to enlightenment, having overcome that, and chup, having realized whatever is to be realized. That is the Tibetan word for enlightenment. It's not bodhi, which actually means awakening, but it has the connotation of chang, removing, and chup, understanding, realizing. Chang chup. So the Tibetan word is chang chup, bodhi or enlightenment, and then sempa. Sem means mind, and pa means hero. So again, the one who has the hero who has the mind of enlightenment, which refers to having removed what needs to be removed and having realized what is there to be realized, if you want to translate it that way. Anyway, so, and you can also apply, there's another way to look at it as like someone who's training, chang, and training, and chup as in like working towards or having understood at least the true truth. But anyway, it goes too far to go through all the etymologies, all the meanings of the different words. But it gives you a bit of a sense how the Tibetans translated from the Sanskrit and how the meaning was conveyed, or how these words were conveyed in that way. But anyway, going back to Avalokiteshvara, now we have a greater sense why there's this long title. It's a sense of respect. I mean, it's out of respect that all these titles are given, but it's also showing his qualities. And when it says here, he looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and looked at these aggregates. What are those aggregates? In general, it's our own aggregate. So in the case of Avalokiteshvara, his mind and body. looking at them as also empty of inherent existence. The word also can be explained in different ways. Sometimes it is explained that not just the five aggregates are seen as empty of inherent existence, but also the constituents that make up the aggregates, they're also seen. So it's not just the aggregates themselves, mind and body itself, but also the things that make up mind and body. The mind, they're made of parts other than themselves, right? The body is made of different limbs. The mind is made of different moments and different types of minds. So they are also understood to lack inherent existence, right? So, for instance, when I ask you to reflect on the fact that this table cannot be found among its parts, that it lacks inherent existence, we may have the tendency to think, oh yeah, the table is just labeled, but the parts are really there, right? So the basis, on the basis of these parts, I call it a table, but the parts are really there. The table is just labeled. But actually, when you understood that the table cannot be found to exist the way it appears, well, then you take the table leg. You take the table leg, you take the surface, you take the nails, the glue, and look for the essence of them. But they can't be found either. Therefore, when it says that Avalokiteshvara beholds, he understands, he reflects on the emptiness also of the aggregates, this means that on top of that, he's also aware that whatever constitutes the parts of the aggregates, they also lack inherent existence. That's one explanation, but oftentimes the also is also, and the word also is interpreted to mean the self, the I. Also reflecting on, so implied in these words is he reflects on Avalokiteshvara himself, doesn't exist inherently. His aggregates don't exist inherently. And if you want to include the constituents, they also don't exist inherently. In fact, nothing exists inherently. So he was inspired to start to reflect on that. But it's said that these words are saying that he's not directly experiencing it in that moment. He's not absorbed in a meditative absorption, like directly experiencing it, because otherwise he wouldn't hear Shariputra's question. If you're in this meditative equipoise, your sense consciousnesses are not active. It's like when we're asleep. When we're asleep, our sense consciousnesses are not active, right? If someone sits next to you and talks to you, you don't hear it. Of course, if it's really, really loud and you know, through the input, through your senses and so forth, you may wake up from it. That's different. That's a physical reaction then to the noise, for instance, or to the light hitting your retina. I mean, even if your eyes are closed and the sun shines into your face. But other than that, while you sleep, your sense consciousnesses are not active. When you're dying, your sense consciousnesses, they're not active. At some point, they stop functioning. Only your mental consciousness is active. And when you fall asleep, the process of falling asleep and of dying is very similar. Every night we go through a little death. And every morning we're reborn. Right? It's very similar. It's a very interesting process. So at night, our sense consciousnesses absorb. At death, they do too. And if you go into this meditative equipoise as a non-Buddha, as a non-enlightened being, the mind absorbs into emptiness and the focus is only on emptiness and the sense consciousnesses are no longer active. So here Avalokiteshvara cannot, although he has the ability, he's called an Arya, which means he is someone who has realized emptiness, has experienced it directly with this meditative equipoise. However, not at this point, because otherwise he would have missed Shariputra's question. Right? Okay, so implied, therefore, you notice this. So this is the part, and now comes Shariputra's question. All right. So he's a Mahasattva because he teaches the Dharma that leads all beings to enlightenment and so forth. Okay, now the actual sutra starts. This was the prologue, giving you the background, the common and uncommon, and now the question. The question of Shariputra. It goes, then through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? Okay, first of all, might as well get that out of the way. He says only son. Only son, no daughters are mentioned. Some translations say child. How should a child? In some Sanskrit versions, it is said that it has son and daughters. I like this version. Why? Because the answer is any son and daughter, don't forget, right? So it's a bit like that. The way the Tibetans recite it, it's also really funny. They say like, Rikipuam, Rikipumu, Kanala Sheragipadu. Rikipumu means daughter of the lineage. So in Tibetan, it's always stressed a little bit. So I find that, especially at that time, when women didn't have the same, rights that they have nowadays, and there's still some room for improvement, let's face it, right? So just to stress, then, if people think, and there were some traditions in which people thought only men could become enlightened, right? There were some traditions at the time, only a man, so you have to become reborn a man in order to become liberated, to become a Buddha. And there's some texts that reflect that. But according to the teachings the Buddha gave, that are described as the Sanskrit tradition, the universal vehicle, the Buddha, the higher the teachings, the more advanced they were, the more important the women became. The female in the Tantra, you have the female aspect of this and that. Male and female were seen as equal. In fact, to be a tantric practitioner, you need to bring together both your male and female aspect and complete it in your practice, right? But this is this is a higher practice of Tantra. So if we leave aside Tantra, we're not talking about Tantra. We're talking about the universal vehicle teachings, in which is very much stressed. Male or female, doesn't matter. All have the same ability. So I think it's quite nice that the question is first a son, a man is mentioned, but by the fact that later on the woman is also stressed, it's kind of like saying, don't forget, right? We could, of course, say right from the beginning, son or daughter. As I said, there are different versions of the same text. So I'll leave it up to you, which one you prefer. If you just go for children of the lineage, that's also okay, which of course needs to be explained, what that actually means. But I wanted to mention that right from the beginning, because the son is kind of like just son and no daughter. It's noticeable. Anyway, so it says, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra. Okay. Actually, in Tibetan, it doesn't say venerable. Venerable is a term that is used to translate Tsedandemba. Tsedandemba means the one who has life. In Tibetan, the one who possesses life, Tsedandemba. It's actually a way in which, using the Sanskrit, of course, then, but also in Tibetan, it's a way in which a senior monk addresses a junior monk. A sign of respect, but it still expresses juniority. I mean, it expresses the fact that, you would address a younger monk with Tsedandemba as like a sign of respect. However, if it was Ananda who taught the sutra, he was junior to Shariputra, so that wouldn't work. Which is why it's said that here it doesn't literally mean, it's not used in the sense of this title, but it's like a sense of respect, saying he has the life in him to overcome the afflictions and help others to do the same. Right? I mean, let me just check whether it's correct what I just said. This is slightly incorrect. So someone who having a life free from the afflictions and contaminated karma. Okay, having a life free from the affliction. So having that particular life that is not contaminated. Okay, anyway, you may not be that interested in this, but it's just like each word, of course, has some weight. And here the word venerable is okay to translate it, because if you go and start saying the one with some life, people just get confused. So venerable is fine, but actually in Tibetan, that's the word that is used. And then Shariputra. What does Shariputra mean? well, I'm sure those of you with Sanskrit Hindi background, Putra means son, so the son of Shari, right? So the son of Shari. Shari was the name of the mother. Her name was Sharika. And Sharika apparently is a beautiful bird that is in certain forests, in reed forests as they're called, in a certain type of forests. And I think she either looked or she had a beautiful voice like a Sharika bird. And so she was known in that area where she came from. And so he was called the son of Sharika. And later on he's called Sharatvati Putra. That was the family name. The name of the family was Sharatvati. His mother's name was Sharika, so he was Shariputra. But since he was also his father's, or the name of the actual family, he was part of his father's name, I guess you could say, the name of the family. Just as Buddha was, his family name was Shakya, or he was from the Shakya clan. So likewise, Shariputra's family name was Sharatvati. So sometimes he's addressed as Sharatvati Putra, the son of, right, the boy of the Sharatvatis or whatever. Okay, so that's Shariputra. And the story goes that he was one of the most intelligent of the Buddha's disciples who were striving for liberation. Yeah? There's a story, it's a beautiful story actually, that is told that one of the disciples of the Buddha, one of the original 5 disciples who had been the ascetic companions of the Buddha and who the Buddha gave the first teachings to on the Four Noble Truths, one of them was called Asvati. One was called, it was Papadatu in Tibetan, Papadatu. So Asvajit was his name, Asvajit. So he actually was sent by the Buddha one day. He knew Shariputra and his best friend, Moggallana, I can never pronounce it. I keep switching into the Tibetan version, Moggallana. So anyway, they were always hanging out with each other. They were not Buddhists, but they had disciples who were following a non-Buddhist tradition, and especially Shariputra was really intelligent. And the Buddha knew they were ripe for these teachings, and so he sent Asvajit, he sent Asvajit, one of the previous companions, he sent him on alms rounds. And Shariputra and Moggallana, they always took turns, Moggalpu, or they say Moggalpu exactly in Tibetan, Moggalpu, yeah. Anyway, his friend Moggallana, I can still not say it properly, they took turns to go for alms round, because not just the Buddhists in India were doing alms round, many followers, many spiritual beings or many practitioners went on alms round. So he was also going on alms round, Shariputra, and his friend was supposed to go on the next day. And they encountered Asvajit. And Asvajit's composure, his whole demeanor was so inspiring to Shariputra that Shariputra asked him, "Who's your teacher? Where are you coming from? What is this?" And he said, "I'm a follower of the Buddha." And then Shariputra asked, what does Buddha teach? And he gave him this teaching. It's usually it's usually nowadays recited in the form of the dependent arising mantra. But the words of this mantra is the Tathagata has taught the causes and of all phenomena that arise from causes. Thus he has taught their cessation. Thus has proclaimed the great renunciant. So the Tathagata has taught the causes. He has, of all phenomena that arise from causes, and he has taught their cessation. Thus has proclaimed the great renunciate. So in other words, the Buddha has taught the causes for our suffering, the causes such as afflictions, contaminated karma, but he has also taught their cessation. So these are the words, this is what was proclaimed by the great renunciate, the Buddha. So in other words, he's saying that dependent arising, that all our suffering comes from causes. But since they have causes, there's also a way to remove these causes, because they're dependent on causes, they have arisen from causes. By removing the causes, we can attain the cessation from suffering. So that was really the basic teaching on the Four Noble Truths, but put in this way. And Shariputra got it right away. It was like, whoa, he understood the Four Noble Truths. He understood it. His mind was so ripe to understand it. And he went to see his friend, right? And he told him, I just met this, And Moggallana was like, tell me, what did he say? And since Moggallana wasn't as clever as Shariputra, he had to tell him twice. He told it once, and he was like, tell me again. And he recited it again, and he was like, yeah. And then they went to the Buddha, and they asked to join the Buddha. And then all these disciples. And so they said to the disciples, look, we want to follow the Buddha. It's up to you. If you want to follow us, you can come with us. If you don't want to come, it's up to you. And the disciples decided to join them, and they all joined the Buddha. This is how the story goes. Anyway, that's the story of Shariputra, to give you some sense of who this person is. And he was the most intelligent of the Buddha, of the Buddha's disciples, of the following the fundamental vehicle. All right. I hope I'm not boring you with these stories. No? Okay, good. Okay, I wasn't sure. I mean, of course, there's the philosophical part, but there's also the historical part that you might find inspirational, which reminds me. This is long over the 1.5 hours, so please take a break. How long should we have the break? 15 minutes enough? Okay, enough? Great. So you're welcome, of course, to ask questions in the meantime. But I've got 10:39 now, so how about 10:55? 10:55. I put it right here, and then the gong person can do the gong. Okay, great. The bell person can ring the bell. Thank you.